looming silhouette of the Athens Lunatic Asylum stands against the skyline of southeast Ohio like a dark monument to a forgotten era of medicine. Constructed in the late 19th century, this sprawling complex was built upon the hills overlooking the Hocking River. It was designed according to the principles of Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride, who believed that the architecture itself could cure the ailments of the mind. The building features a central administration section with wings spreading out like the jagged wings of a bat, designed to allow sunlight and fresh air to reach every patient. However, what began as a beacon of hope and moral treatment for the mentally ill slowly transformed into a warehouse for the unwanted, where darkness festered in the corners. The asylum opened its heavy oak doors in 1874, welcoming patients into a facility that was considered state of the art for its time. The interior was adorned with fresh flowers and artwork, intended to soothe the troubled minds of those who resided within. High ceilings and large windows were strategic elements of the Kirkbride Plan, aimed at creating a restorative environment. Yet beneath the veneer of Victorian elegance, a grim reality began to take root as the population of the asylum swelled beyond its capacity. The pristine hallways that were meant to be places of healing eventually became corridors of despair, echoing with the cries of the forgotten and the damned. As the years passed, the patient population exploded, and the staff found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer number of souls in their care. The facility was originally built to house less than 600 patients, but by the middle of the 20th century, it held nearly 2,000. The overcrowding forced beds into hallways and turned day rooms into cramped sleeping quarters where disease and violence spread rapidly. The dream of moral treatment was suffocated by the crushing weight of too many bodies and not enough resources. It was during this period of decline that the asylum earned a sinister reputation that would linger long after its doors were closed. The haunting history of the Athens Lunatic Asylum is inextricably linked to the barbaric medical practices that took place within its walls during the early and mid-20th century in a desperate attempt to manage the unruly patient population. Doctors turned to radical and experimental treatments. Hydrotherapy involved submerging patients in ice cold or boiling hot water for hours at a time to shock their systems into submission. Insulin shock therapy induced violent seizures in patients in the misguided belief that it would reboot their brains. These torturous procedures were carried out with frightening regularity, leaving physical and psychological scars on those who survived them. Perhaps the most infamous chapter in the history of the asylum involves the widespread use of the lobotomy as a means of controlling difficult patients. Dr. Walter Freeman, the second known as the father of the transorbital lobotomy, visited the Athens Lunatic Asylum, frequently to perform his gruesome procedure. Armed with nothing more than a modified ice pick and a hammer, he would sever the connections to the frontal lobe of the brain through the eye socket of the patient. This 10-minute operation often left the victim in a permanent vegetative state, stripping them of their personality and humanity. The casual cruelty of these operations has left a psychic stain on the building that many believe fuels the paranormal activity reported today. The grounds of the asylum are home to 3 large cemeteries where nearly 2,000 patients were laid to rest in nameless graves. For decades, the deceased were buried with only a small concrete marker bearing a number rather than a name, stripping them of their identity, even in death. This final indignity created a landscape of anonymous sorrow, where the spirits of the unclaimed are said to wander in confusion. One particular area of the cemetery features a circle of graves that has become the subject of local folklore and rumors of witchcraft. The layout of the stones forms a perfect circle, leading many to believe that dark rituals were performed there under the cover of night. Among the many tragic tales associated with the asylum, the story of Margaret Schilling is the most enduring and chilling of them all. In December of 1978, Margaret was a patient at the facility who mysteriously disappeared from her ward. A massive search was launched by the staff and local authorities, but no trace of her could be found within the sprawling complex. The winter days turned into weeks, and the hope of finding Margaret alive began to fade with each passing snowstorm. It seemed as though the asylum itself had swallowed her whole, hiding her away in its labyrinth of attics and basements. It was not until January of 1979, over a month after her disappearance, that the frozen body of Margaret Schilling was discovered. A maintenance worker found her lifeless form in the unheated attic of Ward 20, which had been closed off and used for storage. She was found lying on the floor with her clothes neatly folded beside her, indicating she had undressed before succumbing to the bitter cold. The discovery was grim, but what lay beneath her body would prove to be the most disturbing aspect of the entire ordeal. The decomposition of her body, combined with the harsh sunlight streaming through the window, had created a permanent stain on the concrete floor. The outline of the body of Margaret Schilling remained clearly visible on the floor long after her remains were removed from the attic. The stain details the position in which she died, capturing the final moments of her lonely demise in gruesome detail. Despite numerous attempts by the maintenance staff to scrub clean and bleach the concrete, the stain stubbornly returned time and time again. It was as if the stone itself refused to let go of the memory of her death, holding onto the impression of her body as a permanent reminder of the negligence occurred. Today, the stain remains a macabre tourist attraction and a focal point for paranormal investigators. Visitors who have ventured into the now abandoned sections of the asylum report an overwhelming sense of dread that permeates the air. The heavy atmosphere is often accompanied by the sound of disembodied footsteps echoing down the long, empty corridors. Some witnesses claim to hear the faint sound of gurneys squeaking, as if invisible nurses are still transporting patients to surgery. The energy in the building is described as heavy and oppressive, pressing down on the chest of anyone brave enough to enter. It is a place where the barrier between the living and the dead feels terrifyingly thin. The tunnels that run beneath the asylum complex are another source of fear and fascination for those who explore the grounds. These subterranean passages were originally used to transport food, laundry, and patients between the various buildings, especially during the winter months. In the darkness of these tunnels, people have reported seeing shadow figures darting between the pipes and feeling icy hands brush against their skin. The tunnels were also used to transport bodies to the morgue, keeping the reality of death hidden from the other patients. The dark energy of these transport routes seems to have trapped the residual emotions of fear and despair. One particularly harrowing account comes from a former security guard who was tasked with patrolling the empty buildings at night. He described walking through the psychotropic ward where the most violent patients were once housed and feeling a sudden drop in temperature. His flashlight flickered and died, leaving him in absolute darkness. As the sound of guttural growling emerged from the corner of the room, he claimed to feel a physical pressure pushing him backward, as if an invisible force was warning him to leave. He fled the building in a panic and refused to ever return to that specific wing of the asylum. The administrative section of the building, with its grand staircase and imposing architecture, is said to be haunted by the spirits of the staff who worked there. Apparitions of nurses in old-fashioned, starched white uniforms have been spotted walking up the stairs, only to vanish into thin air. Some believe these are the spirits of those who tried to help the patients, but were ultimately powerless against the systemic abuse. Their ghosts are seen weeping or pacing, anxiously, perhaps, seeking redemption for the horrors they witnessed and could not stop. The guilt of the past seems to hang over the administrative wing like a heavy fog. Deep within the structure of the asylum, the padded cells still exist as a testament to the violent outbursts of the past. Scratches can still be seen on the doors and walls where desperate patients tried to claw their way to freedom. In these confined spaces, visitors often report feeling sudden waves of intense rage or sorrow that are not their own. It is believed that the intense emotional energy expended by the patients has been absorbed into the very materials of the building. This phenomenon, known as the stone tape theory suggests that the asylum is replaying the trauma of the past on an endless loop. The tuberculosis ward, located at the top of the hill, was a place of isolation and slow death for those infected with the disease. Patients sent there knew they would likely never return to the main population or their families. The spirits lingering in this area are said to be particularly restless, often manifesting as coughing sounds or labored breathing heard in empty rooms. The isolation felt by these patients in life appears to have continued into death, creating a pocket of profound loneliness on the asylum grounds. The wind whistling through the broken windows of the TB ward sounds eerily like the wheezing of dying lungs. Explorers who have managed to gain access to the attic where Margaret Schilling died describe the experience as life-altering. The air in the attic is described as stale and devoid of any movement, even when the windows are open. Upon approaching the stain on the floor, many people report feeling a wave of nausea or dizziness. Some have even claimed to see the translucent figure of a woman standing near the window, staring out at the grounds below. It is widely believed that the spirit of Margaret is trapped in that attic, endlessly reliving her final cold days. The basement of the main building housed the morgue and the laboratories where autopsies and experiments were conducted. The cold ceramic tiles and rusted drains serve as a grim reminder of the clinical approach taken to death in the asylum. Electronic voice phenomena captured in this area often contain pleas for help or warnings to get out. The spirits here seem more aggressive, perhaps angry, at the desecration of their bodies in the name of science. The feeling of being watched is intense in the basement, with many reporting the sensation of eyes boring into the back of their skull. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the closed asylum became a magnet for thrill seekers and legends of satanic cults. Stories circulated about groups breaking in to perform rituals in the operating theaters, hoping to tap into the dark energy of the place. While much of this is likely urban legend, the graffiti and vandalism found inside suggest that the building attracted those with a morbid curiosity. These intrusions likely disturbed the resting atmosphere of the asylum, stirring up the activity that had settled over the years. The disrespect shown by trespassers may have angered the spirits who consider the asylum their eternal home. The integration of the asylum grounds into the campus of Ohio University has done little to quell the stories of the supernatural. Students living in dormitories that now occupy parts of the land report strange occurrences, such as lights turning on and off and objects moving on their own. The university has embraced the history to an extent, housing the Kennedy Museum of Art in the main administrative building. However, the juxtaposition of modern student life and the dark history of the asylum creates a jarring contrast. past is constantly bleeding into the present, reminding everyone that the land is stained with suffering. One of the most disturbing aspects of the asylum history is the sheer number of women who were institutionalized for reasons that would be considered absurd today. Women were committed for hysteria or menopause, or simply for being difficult wives or daughters. These women were often subjected to the harshest treatments in an effort to make them docile and obedient. Their spirits are said to be the most active, channeling a righteous anger against the patriarchy that imprisoned them. The feminine energy in certain wings of the asylum is described as fierce and protective, warning men to keep their distance. The cemetery, known as the Ridges Cemetery, is a solemn place where the numbered graves stretch out in uniform rows. In recent years, there has been an effort to identify the bodies and replace the numbers with names restoring dignity to the deceased. However, many believe that the disturbance of the graves or the years of neglect have caused the spirits to become untethered. Visitors to the cemetery at dusk have reported seeing shadowy figures standing by the tree line, watching them in silence. The feeling of being an intruder is palpable among the rows of sunken earth. Legend speaks of a creature or entity that stalks the wooded areas surrounding the asylum grounds, known only as the Shade. Descriptions vary, but it is often depicted as a tall, amorphous black shape that moves with unnatural speed. Some speculate that this entity is an amalgamation of the negative energy released by thousands of suffering patients over the century. It is said to feed on fear and is attracted to those who come to the asylum with disrespectful intentions. Encounters with the Shade leave victims feeling drained and physically ill for days afterward. In the operating rooms where lobotomies were performed, the silence is deafening and heavy. The rusted surgical lights still hang from the ceiling, casting long shadows over the empty space where the table once stood. Psychics who have visited these rooms describe seeing scenes of blood and hearing the cracking of bone. The trauma inflicted in these rooms was so severe that it seems to have scarred the very fabric of reality. It is a place where science went mad, and the Hippocratic Oath was twisted into a license to mutilate. The story of the alligator lady is another local legend that adds to the mystique of the Athens Lunatic Asylum. It is said that a patient suffering from a skin condition that made her skin scaly and rough was kept in isolation in the basement. She was allegedly treated like a monster by the staff and mocked by other patients until she died in misery. Her ghost is said to crawl on the floor of the basement tunnels, scratching at the legs of anyone who dares to enter her domain. Whether true or folklore, it highlights the dehumanization that was rampant in the facility. Night watchmen who patrol the renovated sections of the building often refuse to enter certain rooms or corridors alone. They speak of doors that that slam shut by themselves and elevators that move to the basement level without being called. Security cameras have allegedly captured orbs and unexplained mists drifting through the locked wings of the complex. The fear among the staff is real and palpable, rooted in personal experiences that they cannot explain rationally. The building seems to have a consciousness of its own, watching and reacting to those who walk its halls. The architectural design of the asylum, while beautiful on the outside, created a labyrinthine interior that was easy to get lost in. The repetitious hallways and identical doors were meant to create order, but instead created a sense of entrapment. For a ghost story, this setting is perfect, as it mirrors the confusion of the mind. Spirits are said to wander these endless loops, unable to find their way out, just as they were unable to escape in life. The design that was meant to cure became a cage for both the living and the dead. There are accounts of ghost hunters who have provoked the spirits of the asylum and paid a steep price for their arrogance. One group recorded distinct voices telling them to leave, immediately followed by physical scratches appearing on their bodies. Equipment failures are common, with fresh batteries draining in minutes and cameras malfunctioning inexplicably. The entities within the asylum seem to have no patience for those who treat their suffering as a spectacle. The message is clear that this is a place of tragedy, not a playground for the curious. The presence of children in the asylum is a lesser known but equally tragic part of its history. Children with developmental disabilities or epilepsy were often housed alongside violent adult patients. The sounds of children giggling or crying are sometimes heard in the empty courtyards late at night. Small handprints have been found on dusty windows in areas that are inaccessible to the public. The innocence of these child spirits contrasts sharply with the dark, heavy atmosphere of the rest of the facility, making their presence even more heartbreaking. As the sun sets over the ridges, the asylum takes on a menacing appearance, with its Gothic spires piercing the twilight sky. The shadows lengthen, and the building seems to grow in size, dominating the landscape. It is during these hours that the activity is said to be at its peak. Locals advise against walking the trails near the asylum after dark, citing an uneasy feeling that they are being hunted. The darkness of the night seems to amplify the psychic energy of the land, drawing out the things that hide in the corners. The legacy of the Athens Lunatic Asylum is a complex tapestry of medical ambition, human suffering, and supernatural mystery. It serves as a stark reminder of how society has treated its most vulnerable members throughout history. The ghosts that haunt these halls are not just scary stories, but echoes of real people who lived and died in misery. They demand to be remembered not as monsters, but as victims of a broken system. The horror of the asylum lies not in the supernatural, but in the reality of what happened there. Even as the university repurposes the buildings for modern use, the core of the asylum remains untouched by time. The stain of Margaret Schilling serves as an anchor, keeping the past firmly tethered to the present. It is a physical manifestation of the idea that some tragedies are too great to be washed away. The cleaning crews have long since given up on removing the mark, accepting it as a permanent part of the building. It stands as a warning that the past is never truly gone. The psychological weight of the asylum is felt by everyone who steps onto the property, whether they believe in ghosts or not. There is a somber reverence that naturally falls over visitors as they walk the grounds. The history of lobotomies and forced treatments hangs in the air, creating a moral heaviness. It forces one to confront the dark side of human nature and the capacity for cruelty disguised as care. The ghosts are merely the messengers of this uncomfortable truth. In the end, the Athens Lunatic Asylum remains one of the most haunted and historically significant locations in the United States. Its empty windows stare out like hollow eyes watching the world change, while it remains frozen in time. The stories of the shade, the stain, and the nameless dead ensure that the facility will never be truly abandoned. It is a place where the walls talk and the floorboards remember. The darkness of the Kirkbride horror is a legacy that will endure for generations. The final thought that lingers with anyone who investigates the asylum is the fragility of the human mind. The line between sanity and madness is thinner than we like to admit, and the asylum stands as a monument to that precipice. The spirits trapped within are a testament to what happens when that line is crossed and compassion is lost. As you leave the grounds and look back at the imposing structure, you cannot help but feel that a part of you has been left behind. The asylum does not let go of its guests easily.